the only thing we can do as a creative practice is just try things. We have no idea whether something we like or something we spend enormous amounts of energy and time and money is going to be appreciated by others.
And there's very often zero correlation between correlation. How much you like it and or how much time you spend on it.
So the buying a lot of lottery tickets is essentially just us saying, hey, we just have to just try stuff.
I'm Ran Dror, and this is Remake, a podcast about design, systems, and society. In each episode, I talk to someone who's trying to change our lives for the better in some meaningful way, whether through a new product, new venture, or a new way of looking at the world. And I try to understand how they came to it, what makes them tick, and what we can learn from them. Today, we talk about the practice of design and how designers who learn to work with and understand technology can bring a humanistic, creative perspective to technology that can truly transform our understanding of what it can do. I've long believed that advanced technology can be beautiful, poetic, and philosophical in nature. In fact, that's what's called for in an age where tech shapes our lives, takes an increasingly greater part in creative work, and even makes decisions for us. That's why it was so rewarding to sit down with Che-Wei Wang and Taylor Levy, the married couple behind CW&T. They've managed to carve out the space for their own creative, almost contemplative practice. Their studio, CW&T, is an award-winning design practice creating mind-bending products. Over the last 13 years, their work has spanned from interactive software to human-scaled tools that enhance our relationships to work, life, and time. They center around an iterative process of sketching, prototyping, testing, writing code, machining parts, and building each edition themselves to assess their intuitions around improving everyday experiences. Their projects range from devices that alter the perception of time, an electronics curriculum for artists, an astrological compass for space travelers, to objects engineered to last multiple generations. Wang and Levy lecture extensively, and they teach courses on time, electronics, hardware, programming, inflatables, and morphology at Pratt Institute, New York University, and the School for Poetic Computation. In 2022, they won the National Design Award for Product Design from Cooper Hewitt. We spoke in mid-November 2022, and I was excited to talk to them after I saw some of their more thought-provoking pieces, engaging with time. I was a little concerned with my ability to interview two people at the same time. Usually, I tend to go deep with one person, and I wasn't sure how the format would work, but as usually happens with creative people, the conversation took a life of its own and was a delight. We talked about being a couple who works together, balancing parenthood with business and creative design work, the gratitude they feel for being able to have an ongoing creative practice, their creative principles, why they insist on building what they want to see. What does the phrase "buy lots of lottery tickets" mean to them? Their origin story. What did Che-Wei learn while fixing his dad's typewriter as a kid? What did Taylor realize about the Beatles? How did they meet and become a couple? Their creative projects, including Time Since Launch and Solid State Watch, the School for Poetic Computation, generative design and how it can change designers' work, the importance of learning to understand time, and how to make room for your creative practice. I really enjoyed the sense of free exploration that Che-Wei and Taylor exude. Their ability to follow their ideas, try them out, and make them better, trusting that there will be people who would purchase what they make. This sense of trust feels like their greatest strength. That and their radical openness to new ideas, new technologies, new perspectives. I think you'll enjoy that as well. We have some amazing episodes lined up for you with thinkers, designers, makers, authors, and activists answering questions like, how can we program and control human cells? Why did the Stoic philosophers thought anger was the most destructive of emotions, and how did they suggest fighting it? Why are more and more people around the world turning to co-living communities as an attractive idea? And what do most people still need to understand about transgender and non-binary individuals? But before they can get to you, these episodes need to be edited, audio mixed, and published. And Remake is now in a time of transition, as I'm preparing to move my life and business back to the US, with a lot of uncertainty around the future of the Israeli business. In order to keep our team running and protect the podcast from the vicissitudes of life, politics, and business, we're asking for your support. If you value the podcast and the hard work that 5 different people are putting in on every single episode, please consider becoming a supporter or making a one-time donation at remakepod.org/support. Or go to our website and click Become a Supporter. You can make a one-time donation or join as a monthly or yearly supporter, which will entitle you in the future to access any premium episodes, longer versions of episodes, video interviews, and a paid Remake newsletter. We have a lot of plans on how to make Remake into a real community and invest in more content, including short-form content. And of course, the podcast itself will always feature in-depth conversations with people who are trying to change our lives for the better. But right now, we really need your help. So if you value what we do, please, once again, go to remakepod.org/support. And now, without further ado, let's jump right in with Che-Wei Wang and Taylor Levy. All right. I'm sitting here with Che-Wei Wang and Taylor Levy. Folks, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. Thanks for having us.
Hello.
All right. So this is an unusual treat and a challenge for me because I'm used to going very deep with one person. And usually my test for myself in these conversations is did the person discover something about themselves that they didn't know they were going to say or that they didn't even realize that was in them. Now we have both of you here. Some of the questions are going to be for both of you. Some of them are going to be for one of you. And then hopefully we'll get to a similar level. You're a couple, so I think that would maybe make it easier than 2 strangers.
Yeah. Maybe you'll reveal something about our relationship that we don't know about. That would be cool.
That we'll have to leave it to discover to see what comes up.
See.
So I like to start always with the present, and if we could check in with the present. And my question to both of you is, what is it like to be you in the world today?
Oh, that's a big question.
Yeah, I don't know how to answer it. I feel like we're the luckiest people in the world. That's how I feel. I don't know if that answers the question.
Is your question more like describe what it's like to be you in the world, or?
Yeah, we could start with, your routine these days and what you feel about it. What are you dealing with these days? And then what your mindset is I think gratitude is a great one.
Right. Okay. Yeah. What's our daily routine look like, Taylor?
No, I don't know. I like what you said. Like, I do also feel a great sense of gratitude every day, mainly because we have a company, we have a practice, a creative practice, and we get to have a lot of agency in terms of what we choose to do on a day-to-day basis. We have 2 young kids and we spend a lot of time with them also, and we're able to spend a lot of time with them. Obviously, that is like a whole other life and job in itself, but it's really nice to be able to blend the worlds of our creative practice, our work, and also having a family and like really being able to give our kids time. And I feel really lucky about that.
Yeah. Same. The part that makes me feel so lucky to be where we are today, right now, is how much control we have over deciding where and how we spend our time. I think both of us are very motivated to do work. Like, we love working. Like, we love designing stuff. We love our practice. And we're lucky that we get to do that, and it's mixed with our home life. So, it's like there is no work-life balance. It is one giant mush. And things just happen when they happen. Yeah, sometimes it's out of our control, but I think oftentimes it is in our control. We get to decide, it's, hey, I'm gonna sketch right now, and that's cool. Or I'm gonna go prototype this thing right now. Or it's like, I gotta go answer some emails right now. But we get to, for the most part, decide, and I've come to appreciate it quite a bit.
And you're relatively new parents, is that correct?
Yeah,
Doesn't
maybe.
feel
Our
new.
kids are 8 and 5.
Oh, okay. 8 and 5. Okay, so not totally new. So you're used to combining parenting with running a business. And so
Yes.
How does that balance out?
It's evolved a lot, I think, over the years. It's ebbed and flowed into, there's really hard days, and then there's days where both kids aren't sick and they both can go to school and they both go to the same school. And, we have a good chunk of hours where we get to feel more like ourselves separate from our kids. And we get to actually like do work or do the things that we like to do. Yeah, it's evolved, I think, a lot. There wasn't a lot of that time, especially when they were super young and over the last few years.
I feel like they're at an age now where we've kind of overcome this hump where they've become more independent. So the two of them can entertain themselves and do their own work, do crafting activities on their own while we're doing our thing. Like they have their own thing going on. So these days it feels really nice. Yeah, and we get to show what we've done. They get to show what they've done. Yeah, it's great.
And it's like coming back from school and you're showing what you made and they show what they made.
It's so much fun. I love being like, check out this thing.
So you've done some amazing things, and some of the products I definitely want to mention later on. But as a kind of way in, I really like to get to know the person before I look at the work. And so I have an opening question for that journey, and I'm going to ask you both to think about your answer separately, which is what's something you've learned in childhood or early in life that still drives or guides you today?
I think I know mine because it's a huge turning point for me. I don't know what the exact lesson was from this moment, but I must have been 9, either 9 or 10. My dad's typewriter broke. It was a motorized typewriter, so it's one that had a motor that's constantly spinning, and then when you push a key down, it uses the motor to propel the whatever you call it, the thing forward to hit the ribbon and make the mark. And it broke. And my dad was like, oh, here, you can mess around with this now. And, it's my first memory of having the opportunity to take something relatively complex and expensive and have my parents' permission to take it apart. And so I took it apart and I fixed it. And it's probably a fluke that I fixed it, but I fixed it. And it was such a gratifying feeling. I felt proud and I felt like I accomplished something. And I was like, check this out. I fixed this thing. Isn't that so cool? And yeah, it was such a cool moment. And I think since that moment, I never lost that desire to take things apart and try to fix it, both like literally as like physical objects around our house, but also conceptually. Like anytime I see something, I'm like, I think I can make a better version of that. It's sort of my attitude with everything. And I think that still drives me in all my daily interactions with objects around me.
Yeah, that's amazing. Taylor.
I don't know. It's a hard question. But one thing that comes to mind, I think that's sort of stuck with me my whole life. I remember growing up and being introduced to like, the thing that comes to mind, and this is so weird, is like the Beatles, for example. And I remember like my dad at one point, we would listen to the Beatles and hearing what they do and hearing that music, I was like, I always in my head, I was like, there's like certain people who are just, they don't even seem like people in your brain. And when I remember being very young and being like, it's not possible for like any person, like any real person, to go and like achieve and like be creative in a way that like, for example, the Beatles are. And I think over time, and I think as I've gotten older, I realized like this very important lesson that everybody is really just people. And I really do feel like everybody has the capacity, if like they have that desire, to do creative work and to have a creative practice. And yeah, I think it's just like, we're all just people. That's it. And I think about that sometimes. And, you know, it's like a very liberating thing. It gives you confidence to know that, you know, somebody figured this out and we're all just people and everybody can figure things out.
That's you end up at kind of a similar place of like looking at something and thinking, I can figure this out. Maybe I can make it better. Maybe I could learn how to work it. So Tilly, you described yourself as an overprogrammed child. So how did your journey take you into design? Because I know you also studied film and computer science and these other things. So, you know, how did you find yourself in this discipline?
Yeah, I think I was the type of person, I didn't actually know what design was. Like I knew that there was things that were made and people made choices about them. Like I had that intuition, but I didn't know that design was actually a discipline until I was probably in my like early 20s, I would say. But very naturally, I liked this idea of having an idea and like figuring out how to make it and making choices about how that thing would come to be in the world. So I did from a very early age. I was always like coming up with these little projects and these little businesses or these funny little ideas that I was trying to make happen. And I remember once I like pitched a toy to a toy company. I think I was like 20 at the time. I had a lot of little incidences of those things where, like for me, the fun of it was like coming up with the idea and like architecting the whole system. And I would get to the point where I would like make the thing, but then like growing a business from it, that part was not fun for me at all. And so I never really took any of those little projects any further than that. But it was just a very natural thing that I always did. And I guess I didn't even learn about design as a job until way, way later. Che-Wei and I, we met in grad school at a place called ITP. And at the time, we were writing a lot of software. And also, I was making a lot of art projects, sculptures with electronics. And Che-Wei was also he was building clocks at the time. And also doing like sculptural and conceptual work. And I think once we graduated, we really just wanted to keep creating things. And at the time, software was like how we could make money. And so we did spend a few years doing a lot of software consulting. But there wasn't really like a separation between the physical making and the software part. Like in our heads, we kind of just very naturally went into both of them and could create within both of those paradigms. Like it was very fluid. So yeah, the making things virtually, making things physically, there wasn't much of a difference ever in my head.
So, Che-Wei, what was your journey into design? Were you earlier to find out about design? Did you find it out gradually?
Yeah. So my journey into design, I think similarly, I didn't know about design as a discipline when I was younger, but I remember the typewriter thing really did kick it off. Starting around then, I sketched a lot, similar to Taylor, just like out of a desire of wanting things and wanting to make things. And right all the way through high school, I just drew a lot. I sketched a lot. I wasn't a very good illustrator, but I would just draw things that I wanted for myself. I grew up in Tokyo, and there's some amazing, we still go to Tokyo a lot, and there's a lot of cool stuff to look at. There's so much good product design in Japan. And so after school, literally every day after school, I would walk through this store called Tokyo Hands. And it happened, the one that was near my school was a long Tokyo Hands. So you could go in. It happened to be in the path between the school and the train station that I had to take home. And so I would enter Tokyo Hands on one end and I'd walk through the entire store and come out the other end, and that's where the train station was. So literally every day from 3rd grade to 8th grade, so for 5 years, now I'm remembering this, for 5 years, every day of the school year, I would walk through Tokyo Hands and just window shop. I didn't have money to buy stuff, but I just would touch everything, look at all the things they had in the store. And it's such a well-curated store. We still go to it every time we go to Tokyo. It's probably the store we go to most often. And it was such a pleasurable thing to see all these cool things that other people were making and designing. And so I'd go home and I would just sketch things that I wanted, and sometimes they were very similar to things in the store. Sometimes they were just like things that didn't exist. And Tokyo Hands also happens to be this sort of catering towards the DIY crowd. So they have an area where you can buy raw materials and get wood cut, and they have like DIY supplies. So if you wanted to make your own electronics, they have all that kind of stuff. So, it felt right for me. And in my head, I knew that's the direction I wanted to go. So I remember buying blocks of plastic and wood and brought it home thinking, oh, now I just have to like carve this into the thing that I want. But I had no skills. I really had zero craft, and I didn't know what tools to use to make anything. And I remember feeling incredibly frustrated because I had these ideas I wanted to manifest and I just couldn't do it. That was my entire high school experience, was just like this incredible level of frustration around having ideas, not being able to make any of them. And it wasn't until I broke my knee my senior year in high school, which forced me to spend time in the art room. I went to high school where everybody played sports after school. And so I broke my knee, which meant I couldn't do sports, which meant I could spend all my time in the art room. And thankfully I had this amazing art teacher that just fed me, just completely supported everything I wanted to do. I was like, I want to play with wax. And she's like, all right, here's 2 gallons of wax. Go figure it out and make a mix. And I'd do that. And then I was like, I want to play with jewelry, silver, soldering. And she's like, okay, here you go. And she just let me do stuff. And I got to spend an entire year, had the entire art room to myself, just messing around with so many different materials. We made trips to the junkyard. It was so cool. I don't know. I got a huge boost out of that. So then when it came time to apply for college, I still didn't know industrial design existed, but I did know architecture was a discipline that was design related. So I applied to architecture school. I interned at an architecture firm the summer before going into architecture school and kind of fell in love with it. I was like, this is so cool. Someday I want to design my own house. That's all I cared about. It's like, I just want to learn enough architecture so I could design my own house and design everything that goes in the house. And so that was my fuel that kept me going through architecture school. And then, I don't know. And then it keeps going. But that's sort of how it started for me.
Nice. Now, how did you two meet? Was it love at first sight? How did you start working together?
It was a one-way love at first sight.
I keep learning these things about your love at first sight. I thought we were just friends for a really long time.
Yeah.
He only told me like a few months ago that it was love at first sight.
No. Nice. I told her, it
wasn't at first sight. We were friends for a long time.
Yeah, we were friends.
And we were working together for a while on projects and...
No, but when we met in grad school at NYU, ITP. And first, we were in a small friend group. It's a pretty loose friend group. There's no major cliques there. So everyone's kind of hanging out with everybody. And we hung out a few times. And we started working on projects together, like side projects at ITP, which happens quite a bit. So we did that. And then I was like, hey, Taylor, I like you. And then she's like, I don't like you. So what about that? And then I was like, well, fine. Let's at least work together. So we kept working together. And then we worked together on a job, like a paying job. I was like, Taylor, there's this job we got to do. It's going to pay. Let's do it together. And she said yes to that. So that was kind of, our studio started before our romantic relationship started, but it was a one-way romantic desire for a while we started our studio. And then after we graduated, we opened up our studio, just doing software work. And then
it was a slow and steady
Taylor
thing.
finally came on board. She's like, okay, let's date.
I don't like making rash decisions. I took my time.
Yeah, you took your time.
Yeah.
Well, I heard there's some story related to food poisoning that was
there
catalyst.
totally
How do you know
is.
these things? There is a food poisoning story.
Che-Wei decided that after we graduated from ITP, he was like, I go on this, he taught at Pratt, and he was like, I take this Pratt trip. You should come and teach with me on this Pratt trip. We're going to go to Vietnam and Cambodia and China this summer. Just come. And I was like, okay, I'll go. And so I went, and I got really bad food poisoning. I was a little too adventurous with like this weird fruit that I ate.
It was like fermented fruit.
Some fruit, but it
selling.
shouldn't have been fermented. And I was eyeing it the whole trip. And I was like, I want to try that. And on our last night in Cambodia, I got it on our way back to the hotel. And I like took a bite, had some, he took a bite. He immediately ran home.
It's like, I
was like, where are you
go
going?
to the bathroom right now.
And then some random person on the street also took a bite who was like, what is that? I've been wanting to try it too. And so I gave it to them. I don't know who they are.
Might have died.
Hopefully they're fine. But I was very sick. And at one point,
she was so sick
I
had to carry her to the hospital, which happened to be very close, across the street, thankfully. And they pumped her full of antibiotics, but
which made me more sick.
Saved her life, but ended up elongating her sickness to a few days.
Yeah.
But then at some point you woke up.
I had on my worst night, I remember I was looking at this water bottle being like, if you don't drink that, you are gonna die. You will not wake up tomorrow. And then something happened in that night where I was like, I think I like Che-Wei now. And then we lived happily ever after.
Well, the way you tell it, you're like, I don't know, didn't you in your sleep or before you slept, you're like, if I live, then I'm gonna
like Che-Wei?
Yeah, or something. I don't know.
I don't think I actually thought that. Maybe I did.
Anyways, you felt good to be alive.
It felt good to be alive.
And I happened to be there.
And you happened to be there.
That's a beautiful story. I think a lot of people would love to have a story like that. So, and then now you're husband and wife, and you're also working together, and you're running this studio. Mm-hmm. So tell me a little bit about the studio itself. What are you trying to do with it? Is there a mission statement? Is there a goal for why you're doing what you're doing?
Yes and no, I'd say. Yeah. Like we have a studio, I think, just out of a desire to make things, which is how our studio started. And over the years, it's morphed quite a bit from writing software from clients to doing hardware. And then there's some art stuff in there. But we do have a mission.
We do have a mission,
don't we?
Yeah. Well, I think our first... Yeah, but I think before we go there, like if we're just talking about it honestly, it's like our primary idea was like, is it possible? Is it possible to have a creative practice and also support ourselves? For me, that was like the biggest question at the very beginning. It's still a question today. And it's like, how much of a creative practice can we have? How creative can it be and still support ourselves? And, like our work spans from things that are very practical and to like very conceptual, what would almost seem like speculative design work or speculative ideas, but they're actually real things. And like every day we're asking ourselves, like, is this still possible? Is this still possible? I think we've answered the question. I think it is, but I would be lying if I said I still don't, there's so much unknown in the future. And I do think we continuously have to adapt. And we will be answering that question for the rest of our lives in a lot of ways.
But I feel like we're over that hump.
You always feel way more confident about
I'm just on that side of the hump. Yeah. Like I don't worry about our studio existing or not existing. Like that's not a question to me. I know we're going to keep making stuff regardless. Like
I don't worry about that. Yeah.
Right.
I don't.
Since in the sense of like the studio existing, it will always exist as long as we exist. And then I think over the years, as we've created more and more things, that our practice has revealed to us what we're interested in and what our mission is, however loose that is. Like these days, we're very interested in shifting people's perspective on timekeeping. And so we are trying to do that through products and also through client work. So whenever we get client projects, we're also pushing them to think about how do we change how we think about time through design objects or design proposals. That's sort of where our heads are these days. And maybe it'll change in the future. But yeah, that stuff is really exciting to us.
You're listening to Remake, a podcast about design, systems, and society. If you're listening on a podcast app, you already know how to follow podcasts. So please follow this one. If you're listening in a browser, just go to remakepod.org to find links to all the major podcast players where you can follow our show. So what's your, if each of you could choose one project, one product that you're to this day are kind of most proud of, I'd love to hear a little bit about that to kind of make it concrete for people.
It's probably the same for both of us, right?
I know what you're going to say.
I know what you're going to say.
No, you don't.
Oh, okay. So you're going to say something else.
I might. I don't know. I should say what you're going to say, but...
You don't have to.
You could go ahead. What's your favorite?
My favorite is Time Since Launch.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's the project we should say because it is our best project, I think.
Yeah, I feel like it encapsulates our interests and our design goals and our manufacturing process. And it's not perfect, but it is doing the best at what we're trying to do, I think.
Yeah. So I've seen the Time Since Launch object. I understand some of the complexities, but I'd love to hear it in your own way, kind of how did you come up with this idea? What was the process of making it? And then where did it land? What is this object?
Yes, it's been a long journey. So Time Since Launch originally started when we were both at MIT. And for my thesis work, I made a series of timekeeping devices, and one of which was an early version of Time Since Launch. And the original idea was to create a device, an electronic device that came as a pair. And so the way I designed it, it was a PCB, like a printed circuit board that was kind of like a Siamese printed circuit board. It's like two printed circuit boards with displays with its own electronics and batteries, but it shared like a bridge across them. And when you broke that little bridge, that was the trigger that would start the two, they're essentially stopwatches without the stop. It just starts counting. And so these pairs would count forever or for many years, many days. And the idea came from my fascination with John Glenn, who's the first American to orbit Earth. It's a much longer story, but it's a really fascinating mission. And I got obsessed with this mission and all the stuff that went around it. But one of the coolest things was John Glenn, at the time, this is like early NASA days, the astronauts had a lot of say around what they put in terms of instruments on their bodies and also in their little spaceship. And what was so fascinating to me was that John Glenn, instead of wearing a watch, which is what most astronauts do these days, John Glenn wore a stopwatch on his wrist. Like it just clicked in my head. I was like, why do astronauts wear watches? It makes sense now because everybody goes by GMT time, or maybe they synchronize to Houston, whatever, right? Like you're synchronized to your command center. But I think what was so interesting with John Glenn's decision to wear a stopwatch was like, it's clear that what mattered is not what time is it, on Earth, it matters how long it's been since you've launched in terms of like calculating how much fuel you're using, or like for them to coordinate where in the sky he is, because people on Earth had to like point, like physically aim antennas at him as he's going across the sky in order to keep communication. And so all of this stuff that we don't think about that much revolves around the moment you launch something and knowing how long it's been since you've launched that time. And so, yeah, this like little story that happened in the 60s just made me realize it's so arbitrary how we talk about time. And we could, like any of us could, like you and I, everybody right now, we could just be like, hey, let's all open our stopwatches on our phone and just hit start all together. And we just made our own time zone. And we can refer to that own time zone. And that's nobody else's. Like only we know what we're talking about when we say, hey, it's 5 days since we just launched. And it felt like it felt so empowering to be like, oh, this is maybe one way we can regain ownership over time, because time is so top down, like it's global. It's an amazing thing that we use, but it also feels oppressive. And so I thought maybe this is one way to reclaim these little chunks of time or little kind of pins in our timeline to be like, that moment we all agreed to launch is ours and nobody else can claim that time. Anyway, so that's where the project started. And then it wasn't until many years later that we figured out we could maybe turn it into a product. I think the desire was always there, but we didn't have the engineering chops to make this low power enough to make it a reasonable product. I think when
low power and accurate enough,
right?
Too.
I think the prototypes that I made, I think the batteries would have lasted maybe a year or two, not very long. It didn't feel right to put out a product that's supposed to count for 1 million days and have batteries that only last for a year or two. So it wasn't until we met our electronics wizard / angel / mastermind, Josh Levine, who's our neighbor. He's amazing. And he just showed up like an angel and was like, I can help you make this low power. And he did it. He totally understood the concepts and just nailed the engineering, like really hammered it down and made it so that we can run this for decades.
Now, actually, centuries.
Yeah. Our next version we're
secretly
shipping.
Our new, we have never told anybody about it yet. But
how long?
Over 200 years.
Yeah.
Wow.
On two AA batteries.
It's so crazy. So it's come a long ways. And it's still improving. Like we're still working on little improvements to make it better and better. And it, I think we love it so much because it's this product that it doesn't quite fit in any category. It seems like a weird thing. I think a lot of people don't get it, which is fine. But for people who do get it, I think it's a really meaningful thing that people can have.
And a lot of your projects are around time. So I'm maybe going to dive into that in a little bit, but I want to give Taylor a chance to maybe say a different project if there's a...
Yeah, go.
Yeah, so the project I'm going to choose also, I guess on the surface, it's a time project, but it's really a project about technology. And so the project that I'm thinking about is called Solid State Watch. And it's one of our most beloved, but also one of our most hated, hated projects that we make for good reason. And essentially what this project is, it started off as a celebration of the Casio F91W. It's like this very classic digital watch that a lot of people know of. A lot of people wear it. It's a really inexpensive watch, but what's beautiful about it is it keeps really accurate time. The thing costs under $20 and it stays alive on a battery for, 13, 15 years, which, if you think about all the things that we're used to having today, from our cell phones to our computers, they're all these interdependent devices they depend on these like large, like multi-gajillion dollar infrastructures and satellite systems, all this stuff. But this Casio watch movement, it just it is what it is. And so we took this project and we created like a case for the Casio watch. We take it apart, we take out the movement, And we set it to your time zone, and then we cast it permanently into a movement. So you no longer have access to the buttons or the lights or the alarm or any of those features. And, you live with this object, and you consent to living with this device that will eventually become obsolete. And over time, it will drift because the accuracy of a crystal drifts. And that's something that you feel and you live with on a day-to-day basis. And instead of adjusting your watch constantly or relying on it synchronizing to satellites, you all of a sudden elevate this awareness of this thing actually does work really well. And I haven't done anything to it in a few years, but yes, I have to know that it's before and it's behind. And you start to adjust your own perception based on this relationship you have with this thing that you wear. And so, it's a hard ask, right? We're essentially being we're going to give you this thing. You're going to pay more money for it because we're making it by hand in our house. And it's worse than the thing that you could actually go and buy at the store. But there's a story that we would like to surface that we believe is really meaningful. And it's one of my favorite things because I get to wear it every day. And I do have that relationship with mine. So
yeah,
I like that one a lot.
Yeah, it is also, maybe you already mentioned it, but I think it's important to say it again, the casting in resin is its own, has its own aesthetic and its own world of objects. We cast precious looking insects into resin, or people take vintage sneakers and cast them into resin. It's a way to kind of preserve something.
Right.
And
preserve and
basically
elevate.
What we are saying by doing what we do is saying this Casio F91W that is cheap and ubiquitous, this thing is a piece of magic, the amount of engineering that went into this thing, and it's worthy of being cast into a piece of resin to preserve because it could do it and continue running for 13 years, and it's that cool. It deserves to be treated in this beautiful resin encasement.
Yeah. There's something very beautiful about just the thing just has a life of its own for 13, 15 years. Doesn't depend on anything. It's not connected to Wi-Fi. You're not replacing the batteries, and it lives as long as a cat, right? Or, it's pretty remarkable. So you wrote about your principles for your project, and there's a couple ones that are interesting for me. One is make what you want. In my world of software, we call it eat your own dog food. So I'd love to hear a little bit about that. And then buy lots of lottery tickets is another principle I'd love to hear about.
I think buy lots of lottery tickets is the thing that sparked us wanting to write these principles, because really bought into that idea. We were already in that practice. We were already making lots of things, trying lots of things, but our friend Darius Kazemi really nailed it. He made a presentation at XOXO, which is this conference of, I guess, independent makers conference-y thing. We've never been to it, but a lot of our friends go. Or used to go. I don't think they have the conference anymore. But Darius, at one of the last ones, made this presentation where he is sort of a parody of startup presenters, how people give startup presentations, where he's like, okay, so I figured it out. This is how you buy lottery tickets, or this is how you win the lottery. And and I think the analogy is essentially we're lucky to have our audience. We stumbled into it. There's no magic formula around it. And really, the only thing we can do as a creative practice is just try things. We have no idea whether something we like or something we spend enormous amounts of energy and time and money is going to be appreciated by others.
And there's very often zero correlation between how much you like it and how much time you spend on it.
So the buying a lot of lottery tickets is essentially just us saying, hey, we just have to just try stuff, try things for little amounts of time, spend lots of time buying or trying these giant projects. It doesn't matter. What matters is that we just keep putting stuff out and see what sticks. And hopefully one of those turns out to be a big hit and we win the lottery that way. But it's just like one of those things where we're like, oh, that's what we do? That is what we do. And then we're like, okay, maybe there's some other things we also do and we should write it down as our guiding principles for a studio. So yeah, we wrote a bunch. And what was the other one that you
Make what you want.
Oh yeah, make what you want. Yeah. We just make what we want.
And I guess that goes in line with the practice of buying lots of lottery tickets. We make the things that we want.
Right. But we do it explicitly. We don't have the resources to do market research or user studies.
But
we're also not interested in that. I know, like we're explicitly not in that kind of design practice. There are plenty of other companies that do that work and they make great toothbrushes and all kinds of other products that need that kind of work. We're not in that world and we're not trying to be in that world. And so what we do is we try to design for one person or two people. And those one or two people often are us. I don't know if you've ever designed for anyone else. Maybe we have. But we try to not turn our design projects into something that has mass appeal. We're trying to focus down to be specific about one person's need, usually our needs. And often our ideas come from frustrations and desires that happen in our daily lives. So, that's just how we live and how we create. And so whenever we talk to other creative people trying to start up studios that are at the same scale as us, we're always like, hey, you're your best critic and your best user tester. Just make stuff that you want. Don't worry about what, the millions of other people want. If you make something that you want and you make it really good, you'll find an audience. There are chances that there are other people out there that feel as strongly as you do about wanting this thing that is so weird, so off the beaten path, because it's so specific to just you. I think that's actually a good design. You don't want to make stuff that has mass appeal because maybe nobody wants that thing, and including you, which would suck. So don't do that. Yeah.
You're not trying to average things out. You're trying to make a really perfect product for one person and then trust that there are other people who need it. That reminds me of a conversation I had with the guy who created the ostrich pillow for planes. I don't know if you remember that.
Yeah, I know it.
It's like it's you kind of bury your head in this pillow to completely isolate yourself from the environment.
It's a cool design.
He was like he just flew a lot. And there were always like kids around and like screams and he just wanted to feel isolated. So I love that approach. So you also teach various courses, is that correct? And am I reading this correctly? Poetic Computation?
Oh yes.
Yeah.
The School for Poetic Computation.
Yes.
So what is Poetic Computation?
What is poetic computation?
Say it, Taylor.
I don't know what poetic. I guess the idea behind the School for Poetic Computation is to shift who is making choices and who has access to technological tools from the traditional people who historically are the engineers or the creators of those tools to people who want to use them for an artistic or an expressive practice. When the school started, that was really the idea behind it, and asking the question, what happens if we take these tools and we create a framework or we create pathways in order to give access to more people who aren't necessarily involved in their engineering or making. And I think it's a really important question to ask and a really important agenda to move forward continuously forever.
I think it's such an important question because everything we consider technology, they're just tools. And it's unfortunate that the people who have the power and the knowledge to use those tools tend to be people who are in power and are not using it generally for these creative practices. The mission of the school is really just to reappropriate those tools and give artists enough agency to use code, write code, build electronics, with a critical understanding of the context of using those tools. The same way, like when you study painting, you study all of art history and the entire history of use of oil paint. And what's interesting is that there are a lot of schools out there that are teaching, using creative technology courses. Like creative technology as a thing is becoming more of a discipline, but I think the critical element is not quite there.
The main thing that it started with was technological, like power as technology, but they also teach classes and address other structures of power too within some of their classes. There's a sex ed class, and there's a like critical race theory classes, and those all kind of weave into and use technology kind of as a framework for how the students actually create work in the class. But yeah, it's really amazing what those guys are doing at SFPC.
Yeah, that's amazing. So I remember one of our guests said they were doing projects with big technology companies, and he liked to bring a philosopher into the room to help them think through some of the implications of what they're doing. And then he brought an artist into the room to try to help them imagine things. And the philosopher and the artist and the engineers really wouldn't get along. And then they would get a designer into the room, and the designer would translate what the artists and philosophers saying to what the engineers could understand, and suddenly there was harmony in the room and they could create great things together. And I feel like sometimes it's our job to bring some art or some humanistic values into these rooms where people focus too much on the how and not the why, or what should we do.
Right. Yeah.
So I think that's really lovely. So Che-Wei, you gave this super interesting talk about generative design. So as a designer, there's a lot of discomfort with these tools that might be trying to replace us, and you displayed a lot of comfort with it and a lot of curiosity about it. So I'd love to help us get into that space. And what gets you excited about it? First of all, what is it? What is generative design? And then what should we learn about it?
Yeah, so generative design, I guess, since I've given the talk, it's morphed quite a bit, evolved very quickly. But I think the generative design I was talking about in that context is it's basically just using topology optimization, which is a way of generating forms where you designate where the forces are. It's very engineering. It's engineering heavy. If I'm trying to design a lever arm, so something that has a pivot and I want to put a lot of weight over here, you can just identify what's constrained and what's a pivot and where the load is, and the computer will generate the most optimized form for that load scenario. Imagine if you had to design a door handle and you wanted to make the most lightweight door handle possible. Then right. It's like, hey, this thing needs to perform. It needs to withstand weight coming down on the lever arm. There's a pivot over here, and there's a cantilever. So then can you distribute the material in a way where it's perfectly optimized so that you use the least amount of material and still be able to withstand someone's hand pushing down on the lever arm? And so that's been going on for many years now, but it tends to make things look very similar because there is like an bones. Optimized form. Yeah, it's like very bony and meshy.
Yeah, alien, kind of alien-like.
Right, yeah, very alien and droopy. And yeah, it's quite beautiful. But again, I think the authorship is kind of removed. The author is now essentially, from a design perspective, I feel like the author is the machine. And in the talk, I think it was exciting for me, not that that's what's happening, but what the future looks like. And I think we're starting to see that now. Like the future is all these like text to image stuff we're seeing these days, like DALL-E and Midjourney and Stable Diffusion. Yeah. This stuff is still happening in 2D, but 3D is not that far away. And so I'm excited about this because it essentially means the ability to CAD something, the ability to draw something in 3 dimensions in a computer no longer becomes a skill. Right now it's very, you have to practice so much to become proficient at modeling an idea that you have onto the computer. So the same way I just felt so frustrated as a 9-year-old being like, I don't know how to make this thing. it's true too. Like I have friends and, we talk to people who have these amazing ideas and they don't have the CAD skills to make a precision, like a dimensionally accurate model on the computer so that they can manufacture the thing that they want. And I think once we'll get there, I'm so sure of it in a few years, where it's no longer about manually clicking on the screen to draw the thing you want, but describing the thing. And it'll even do things that you weren't expecting. And it's almost like going to a design consultant for free, like a major design consultancy, and being like, hey, I have this idea. And they like show you proposals. And what about this one? What about this one? And you get to kind of guide where that design goes. And I'm like super excited for that, because it just means we're going to see a lot more cool stuff. Because I think there's a lot more. The world is filled with more ideas than we get to see. So many good ideas, I feel like, never make it into the world because they're stuck behind this giant wall of that people have to get over, because you have to learn CAD and you have to have enough money to pay for this and that. And I think those walls are going to come down, and I'm very excited for that.
Yeah, that's awesome. So this is our standard closing question.
Okay.
And I want to ask to both of you. So in his TED Talk, Alain de Botton talks about the difference between a lecture and a sermon. A lecture being kind of a dry passing along of information and you make up your mind. And the sermon being a passionate plea to change someone's life. And so my question to you is, if you had to give a short sermon to the world, what would it be about?
Oh,
I know what mine would be
really?
about. Yeah.
How do you think about your sermon so fast?
Because there's a thing I want people to do.
What? Okay, go.
It's not so important. It's not like world changing, but it might be. Like, I want people to have a better understanding of time. It's specific to now-ish. I think the last 20 years or so, I'm just like, I'm just the feel, but it feels like people have a lot of anxiety around timekeeping and are rejecting time. Like they don't want to look at the time. They don't want to wear watches. They feel oppressed by time and they don't want to have anything to do with it. And I think that is actually producing more problems than people think. I think there's a discrepancy between our ability to keep time, like literally knowing what 5 minutes feels like, versus the reality of what 5 minutes is. And that discrepancy, I think, causes people a lot of anxiety. Like when you say, hey, I'll be there in 5 minutes, but it actually takes 15 minutes to get there. That's right. On you. Like you just don't have a good estimate of how much time things take. Or if you maybe tested yourself and you're like, hey, I'm going to try to count to 10 and run a stopwatch for 10 seconds. If you're way off, it doesn't sound like a big problem, but that discrepancy in timekeeping trickles into all kinds of stuff, not just like your ability to show up on time. And yeah, I would love for people to be more in touch with the reality of how time passes. Is basically, that would be my sermon. Be like, hey guys, wake up. Time happens. It's passing. You only have this much time in your life, and everybody shares the same amount of time every day. Be aware of it. So I'd love for people to switch over to being more in touch with time.
That's wonderful. Taylor, what's your sermon?
My sermon would be that I strongly believe that there's a place for everybody who feels like having a creative practice in their as part of their life. I really do feel like there are the tools and the resources and support systems available to anybody who wants to make a creative practice part of their life. And I'm not saying that I do know what it feels like to have that urgency to create and not be able to do that. And I know that feeling of not being able to is terrible. And I don't wish that on anybody. And I hope that as time goes on, and I do think that there's more and more increasing possibilities and opportunities for people to make that part of them an actual, real, and sustainable part of their existence in the world. And I think that will be sustainable in different ways moving into the future. I do have a very optimistic feeling about that. And yeah, I just believe it's going to be possible for more and more people moving forward.
That's beautiful. Thank you very much. Thank you both for taking the time to speak to us today.
Thank you so much.
It was a lot of fun.
Yeah, that was really nice.
Remake is produced by myself and Regina Rothstein. Research and editing by Louis Brady, and audio engineering by Greg Cocoveos. If you enjoyed the podcast, please consider writing a 5-star review in Apple's podcast or wherever you're listening. It helps many more people discover the podcast and also just makes us feel good. Current support for the podcast comes from my own design company, Remake Labs. We're a global strategic design sprint agency aimed at improving outcomes through repeated and rapid design interventions. Now, until next time, be well, everyone, and see you next week on Remake.